My mother-in-law called my husband's ex her true daughter-in-law and invited her to every family event. So I made the entire family exclude her permanently. Colton and I got married 3 years ago after dating for 2 years. Before me, he was with Lindsay for 6 years, but they never got engaged because Lindsay kept saying she wasn't ready. She dumped him to go find herself in Europe and broke his heart. We met 8 months later at a cooking class and just clicked. His mom, Diane, seemed happy for us at first, said she was glad Colton found someone who actually wanted to commit. The wedding was beautiful, small, just family and close friends. Diane gave this speech about welcoming me to the family and how happy she was to finally have a daughter-in-law. I thought we were good. Then Lindsay came back from Europe. She was broke, single, and suddenly really interested in being friends with Colton again. He shut it down immediately, told her he was married and happy. But Diane heard Lindsay was back in town and invited her to Sunday dinner without telling us. We showed up and there was Lindsay at the table like nothing had happened. Colton wanted to leave, but Diane made a big scene about how Lindsay was still family, and I needed to be mature about it. I tried to be cool, but Lindsay spent the whole dinner talking about inside jokes with Diane and old memories. Diane ate it up, laughing about things they did together, how Lindsay helped redecorate her kitchen, how they went to wine tastings every month. After that, Lindsay was at every family event. Diane would invite her and not tell us until we arrived. Easter, Memorial Day, 4th of July, there was Lindsay. Diane would introduce her to people as Colton's ex, who was like a daughter to her. She'd introduce me as Colton's wife, nothing else. No warmth, no relationship to her, just Colton's wife like I was some random addition. The real problem started at Diane's birthday party. She had this whole photo display of family memories and half the pictures were of Lindsay and Colton from when they dated. Our wedding photo was nowhere. When Colton asked about it, Diane said she must have forgotten to put it up. But there were 3 pictures of Lindsay from just last month at their wine tasting. Then Diane had Lindsay stand next to her for the birthday toast and called her the daughter she never had. I was standing right there, her actual daughter-in-law, holding the cake I'd made from scratch. The worst moment was at Thanksgiving. Diane's sister was visiting from Texas, and Diane introduced everyone. She got to Lindsay and said, "This is my true daughter-in-law, the one who should have married Colton," then pointed at me and said, "This is his current wife." His aunt looked confused and asked if Colton had been married twice. Diane said no, just once, unfortunately. Lindsay actually laughed. Colton lost it and we left. But Diane called him crying, saying he was choosing me over his mother, that Lindsay understood family values and I was turning him against everyone. She actually said Lindsay would have never let him leave a family holiday. Colton told her to stop, but Diane kept going. She started planning family photos and only inviting Lindsay. She'd post them online, talking about her beautiful family. She threw Lindsay a birthday party and called it a celebration for her daughter. When I got pregnant, Diane's first response was to ask if we were sure we wanted kids since our marriage probably wouldn't last like Colton and Lindsay's relationship did. That's when I decided Diane wanted Lindsay as family so bad, she could have her. First, I started being the perfect daughter-in-law, but only to everyone except Diane. I helped Colton's dad with his garden, brought him lunch at work, and remembered his medications. I became best friends with Diane's sister, calling her weekly, sending her grandkids birthday gifts Diane forgot about. I helped Diane's elderly mother with grocery shopping and doctor appointments. Everyone started noticing how involved I was, while Diane was always busy with Lindsay. Then I started scheduling things. I'd plan family events on days I knew Diane had committed to Lindsay. Colton's dad's birthday dinner, she missed it because Lindsay had concert tickets. The grandkids' school play, she wasn't there because Lindsay needed help moving. Family reunion, Diane didn't show because Lindsay had a crisis about some guy. Each time, I'd make sure everyone knew why Diane wasn't there. People started asking why Diane prioritized her son's ex over her actual family. The masterstroke was Christmas. I organized the entire family Christmas at our house, invited everyone from Diane's side, Colton's dad's side, and cousins from 3 states. Told them all Diane was co-hosting with me. Then I told Diane the wrong date, and I told her it was the 26th when it was actually the 23rd. She believed it because she was distracted planning Lindsay's Christmas Eve party. Christmas came, and 30 people showed up. Everyone was asking where Diane was. I acted confused, said she'd been so involved with Lindsay lately that she must have mixed up dates. Colton's dad confirmed Diane was at Lindsay's. The whole family was talking about how Diane chose Lindsay over her own family at Christmas. When Diane showed up 3 days later for what she thought was Christmas dinner, everyone was gone. She saw the dishes, the decorations, the family photo we'd taken without her. She realized what had happened and started screaming that I'd tricked her. I stood in our doorway watching her face turn red, the family photo crumpling in her grip. Colton moved closer to me, his hand finding mine, and I could feel how tired he was from months of this. She kept yelling about betrayal and manipulation, saying I'd turned her own family against her. The photo was from Christmas, all 30 people smiling without her, and she couldn't stop staring at it. She demanded to know how I could do something so cruel to her. I didn't say anything because I knew whatever I said would make it worse. She was shaking, actually shaking with anger, and kept asking the same question over and over like I owed her an explanation. Colton squeezed my hand and stepped forward. He told his mother she made her choice when she picked Lindsay over everyone else at Christmas. His voice stayed calm and even, which seemed to make her angrier. He explained that we invited her to the right date, that she got the same invitation as everyone else. He said she chose to believe Lindsay's party was more important than her own family's Christmas. She tried to interrupt, but he kept talking, listing all the times she'd picked Lindsay over family events. His dad's birthday, the grandkids' school play, the family reunion. She'd missed everything because Lindsay needed something. She turned on him fast, pointing her finger in his face. She told him I'd poisoned him against her, that the old Colton would never choose a wife over his mother. She said he used to understand family loyalty before I came along. She kept going, saying Lindsay would never have let this happen, that Lindsay understood what family meant. I stayed quiet and watched her dig herself deeper. Colton's jaw was tight, but he didn't yell back. She noticed I wasn't saying anything and turned to me, asking why I was just standing there. I shrugged and told her I had nothing to add. That made her even madder. She started pacing on our porch, talking about how she'd welcomed me into the family, and this was how I repaid her. Within 2 hours, 3 family members had texted me asking what was going on because they'd heard her screaming from inside their cars when they drove past. My phone rang 2 days later while I was making lunch. Wayne's name showed up and I almost didn't answer because I figured he was calling to defend her. I picked up anyway, and he asked if we could meet for coffee without telling his wife. He said he needed to talk to me about everything that happened. I agreed to meet him at a diner across town where nobody from the family would see us. He sounded different on the phone, tired and sad instead of his usual cheerful self. He admitted he'd been watching this situation develop for months and felt terrible about staying silent. I told him I'd be there in an hour. The diner was one of those old places with red booths and a long counter. Wayne was already sitting in the back corner when I arrived. He stood up when he saw me and gave me an awkward hug. We ordered coffee and he started talking before the waitress even walked away. He told me his wife had been obsessed with Lindsay since before Colton and I got married. He said she took the breakup harder than Colton did, that she cried for weeks when Lindsay left for Europe. He explained that his wife saw Lindsay as the daughter she never had, someone who understood her in a way her own kids didn't. I listened and drank my coffee while he kept going. He said he tried to talk to her about it multiple times, but she wouldn't listen. She'd tell him he didn't understand women's friendships, that her relationship with Lindsay was special. Wayne looked down at his coffee cup and said his mother-in-law had been asking him why his wife never visits anymore. He said Isabella called him last week wondering if she'd done something wrong. He was running out of excuses to give her. He wanted to support his son's marriage but didn't know how to handle his wife's behavior without making everything worse. He asked me what he should do. I stirred sugar into my coffee and thought about it for a minute. His wife had put him in an impossible position and he knew it. I told him he should start making his own decisions about family events instead of just following his wife's lead. I said he didn't need her permission to see his grandkids or have dinner with his son. He looked relieved when I said it, like he'd been waiting for someone to give him permission. He admitted he'd been wanting to spend more time with the grandkids anyway, but his wife always had plans with Lindsay on those days. He said he missed half of his grandson's baseball season because she scheduled wine tastings during the games. I told him the grandkids would love to see him more and that Colton needed his support right now. He nodded and said he'd start coming over for dinner once a week. He asked if that would be okay, and I told him he was welcome anytime. My phone rang the next week while I was folding laundry. Haley's name popped up and I answered on the second ring. She said half the family was talking about what happened at Christmas and asking her what was really going on. She wanted to know the truth, because people were giving her different versions of events. I invited her over that afternoon, and she showed up with cookies from the bakery down the street. We sat at my kitchen table and I explained everything. I told her about Lindsay showing up at Sunday dinner without warning, about the birthday party with no wedding photo, about Thanksgiving when her sister called Lindsay the true daughter-in-law. I showed her the texts and the social media posts. Haley's face changed as I talked, going from confused to shocked to angry. She put down her coffee and admitted she thought I was making things out to be bigger than they were before. She said seeing her sister miss Christmas for Lindsay's party made everything click into place. She apologized for not taking my concerns seriously earlier and asked how she could help fix the family damage. Her voice got quiet when she talked about how her sister used to be different, how she used to show up for family before Lindsay came back. She said she didn't recognize her sister anymore. I told her it wasn't her fault that her sister made bad choices. I explained to Haley that I wasn't trying to keep her sister away from family. I said I just needed her to understand that being family means showing up for family, not picking an ex-girlfriend over your own relatives. Haley agreed and said she'd been thinking the same thing but didn't know how to say it. She suggested we plan a family gathering for their mother's birthday that her sister couldn't dismiss as easily. She said Isabella's birthday was coming up in 3 weeks, and it would be the perfect chance to show her sister what she was missing. I liked the idea, and we started making plans right there at my kitchen table. Haley pulled out her phone and started a list of people to invite. She said we'd make it special for their mother and maybe her sister would finally see what mattered. 2 weeks passed and Colton's phone started ringing more often. His brother called first on a Tuesday evening while we were making dinner. I watched Colton step outside to take the call and stayed in the kitchen chopping vegetables. He came back 20 minutes later looking tired and sat down at the table without saying anything. His sister texted him the next day asking if they could talk. I handed him his phone when it buzzed and told him to handle it however he needed to. He went into our bedroom and closed the door. I heard his voice through the walls but couldn't make out the words. When he came out an hour later, he looked like he'd been crying. I hugged him and he held on tight for a long time. His siblings needed to hear everything from him because I was the wife and they were his family. The conversations happened over the next few days. Colton talked to his brother again on Thursday morning before work. He called his sister back that night after dinner. I stayed in the living room while he paced around the kitchen explaining years of Sunday dinners and birthday parties and holidays with Lindsay at every single one. He told them about the photo display at Diane's birthday with no wedding picture of us. He explained the Thanksgiving introduction, where their mother called Lindsay the true daughter-in-law right in front of me. His voice got louder when he talked about our pregnancy announcement and how Diane asked if we were sure we wanted kids since our marriage probably wouldn't last. I heard him say Lindsay's name over and over. I heard him say his mother chose his ex over his actual wife at Christmas. When he finished talking to his sister, he came into the living room and collapsed on the couch next to me. He put his head in his hands and said they had no idea. His brother thought Diane was just being nice to Lindsay because she'd dated Colton for so long. His sister admitted she noticed Lindsay at family events but figured their mother was trying to keep everyone comfortable. Neither of them realized Diane was actively pushing me out while pulling Lindsay in. Colton said his sister felt terrible for not seeing it sooner. She told him she noticed I wasn't in many family photos but thought I just didn't like having my picture taken. She never questioned why Lindsay was always there because their mother acted so normal around everyone else. The family group chat that Diane created 6 months ago suddenly lit up with activity. My phone buzzed 3 times in a row while I was folding laundry. I picked it up and saw messages about planning Isabella's birthday party. Haley sent the first message asking what kind of cake their mother liked. Colton's sister responded saying Isabella loved chocolate with vanilla frosting. Someone suggested the Italian restaurant downtown. Another cousin said she could order flowers. I watched the messages come through and felt my stomach flip because this was actually happening. Diane jumped into the conversation within minutes. She sent a long message about how she should coordinate everything since Isabella was her mother. She listed all the things that needed to be done and assigned tasks to different people. Haley responded immediately saying she was already handling the planning with me. The chat went quiet for a few seconds. Then Diane sent 3 question marks. Haley typed back that we'd been working on the party for over a week and had everything organized. She said Diane was welcome to come and celebrate, but the planning was done. I screenshot the conversation and sent it to Colton without adding any comment. My phone buzzed again 5 minutes later. A private message from Diane popped up on my screen. I opened it and read the first line demanding to know why I was turning her family against her. She said I was manipulating everyone and destroying her relationships with her own children. The message got worse as it went on. She threatened to tell everyone what I really was. She said the family would see through my act eventually. She called me calculating and cruel. My hands shook as I screenshot every word. I sent the screenshots to Colton and put my phone face down on the counter. I didn't respond to Diane at all. Colton called his mother 30 minutes later. I heard his voice through the bedroom door telling her that threatening his pregnant wife was completely unacceptable. Diane's voice came through the phone loud enough that I could hear her crying from the other room. She said she was the victim and nobody understood what I'd done to her. Colton's voice stayed calm and firm. He told her he wouldn't tolerate threats against me anymore. He said she needed to stop blaming me for consequences of her own choices. Diane kept crying and saying she just wanted her family back. Colton said the door was open when she was ready to prioritize actual family over Lindsay. Then he ended the call. I focused on planning Isabella's party with Haley over the next week. We texted back and forth about menu options and decorations. Haley called me Tuesday afternoon and we talked for an hour about what would make the party special. I genuinely cared about Colton's grandmother because she'd always been kind to me. She never made me feel like an outsider or compared me to Lindsay. We chose her favorite restaurant and made a reservation for Saturday afternoon. The guest list included everyone from the extended family except Lindsay, because she wasn't actually family no matter what Diane said. Haley and I split the tasks. She ordered the cake and I handled the decorations. We picked out a beautiful bouquet of purple flowers because Isabella mentioned loving purple once during a grocery store trip. Diane called Haley on Thursday morning. Haley texted me right after saying their conversation went badly. She called me back during lunch and explained that Diane demanded to know if Lindsay was invited. Haley told her no and explained that family events were for family. Diane started yelling about how Lindsay was more family than I would ever be. Haley said she told their sister that she was being ridiculous and hurtful. Diane hung up on her own sister without saying goodbye. Wayne called me Friday evening to confirm he was coming to the party. His voice sounded lighter than I'd heard in months. He said he picked out a gift himself and wanted to make sure we had enough chairs. He mentioned he'd been having lunch with Isabella every week now and she was doing better since I'd been helping with her appointments. Saturday afternoon came and everyone showed up at the restaurant by 2 o'clock. Isabella arrived with Wayne and looked surprised to see so many people waiting. The table was set with the purple flowers and everyone had brought cards and gifts. Diane wasn't there. Isabella looked around and asked where her daughter was. The table got quiet. Wayne reached over and gently told his mother-in-law that Diane was sick today. Isabella frowned and pulled out her phone to text her daughter. Wayne put his hand over hers and said Diane had been very busy lately with her friend Lindsay. Isabella looked confused. She asked who Lindsay was because she'd never heard Diane mention this person. Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Haley cleared her throat and explained that Lindsay was Colton's ex-girlfriend who Diane had become very close with over the past couple years. Isabella's face changed from confused to disappointed. She looked at me and then at Colton and asked if this was true. Colton nodded and said his mother had been prioritizing Lindsay over the whole family, including missing today's celebration. Isabella's face changed from confused to something sadder, something that looked like she'd just learned her own daughter had picked a stranger over her. She reached across the table and her hand felt small and warm when it grabbed mine. She squeezed my fingers and told me I was a good girl for putting this whole party together for her. Her voice cracked a little when she said it, and I could see tears starting in her eyes. Wayne put his hand on her shoulder and the whole table sat there quiet for a minute. Then Isabella looked around at everyone and said she was happy to be here with family who actually showed up. Haley started talking about the cake, and the mood shifted back to celebration, but I could tell everyone was thinking about what just happened. We sang happy birthday, and Isabella blew out her candles and smiled, but her eyes kept drifting to the empty chair where Diane should have been sitting. After the party ended and we helped clean up, people started pulling me aside in the parking lot. Colton's brother came up while I was loading gifts into our car and said he had no idea things were this bad with his mom. He looked embarrassed when he admitted he thought I was being too sensitive about the Lindsay situation. He promised he was going to sit down with Diane and have a real talk about her priorities, because missing her own mother's birthday was crossing a serious line. Haley hugged me before we left and whispered that 3 other family members had said the same thing to her. She looked relieved that people were finally seeing what she'd been trying to tell them for months. Wayne walked us to our car and thanked me again for taking care of his mother-in-law. He said Diane used to handle all that stuff, but she'd been so distracted lately that Isabella's doctor appointments and grocery trips just weren't happening unless I did them. I woke up the next Tuesday morning feeling sick and barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up. I was 4 months pregnant now, and the morning sickness was supposed to be getting better, but some days were still rough. Colton held my hair back and brought me crackers and water after. I sat on the bathroom floor for 20 minutes waiting to see if I'd throw up again. I had to call Haley and cancel our lunch plans because I couldn't imagine eating anything. Then I remembered I'd promised to help Isabella with her grocery shopping that afternoon, and I forced myself to get dressed and drive over there anyway. Colton kept asking if I was okay, and I could see the stress in his face. He'd been so supportive through the whole pregnancy, but dealing with his mother's behavior on top of my morning sickness was wearing him down. He offered to come with me to Isabella's, but I told him to go work on the nursery like he'd been planning. I needed him to have something positive to focus on, instead of just worrying about me all day. That Thursday night, Wayne showed up at our house with a toolbox and asked if Colton needed help with the baby's room. Colton looked surprised because his dad had never just dropped by like that before. Wayne explained that Diane was out with Lindsay again, and he didn't feel like sitting home alone. He started measuring the wall for shelves and asking Colton about paint colors. I made dinner for all 3 of us, and Wayne stayed until almost 10 o'clock, helping hang curtain rods and assemble the crib. He kept talking about how excited he was to be a grandfather and asking questions about due dates and baby names. When he was getting ready to leave, he mentioned that Diane hadn't asked him a single question about the nursery or the baby in weeks. His voice got quiet when he said it, and I could tell it bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Colton walked him out to his car, and they stood in the driveway talking for another 15 minutes. The next Thursday, Wayne showed up again with his toolbox, and this became our new routine. Every Thursday, he'd come over for dinner and spend the evening helping with baby prep. He never called ahead or asked if it was okay. He just showed up like he needed to be there. Diane must have noticed Wayne was gone every Thursday because 3 weeks into our new routine, he came over looking upset. He told us Diane had confronted him at home that morning and accused him of betraying her by spending so much time with us. She'd said I was trying to steal her husband along with her son. Wayne's hands were shaking when he repeated what she'd told him. He said he'd finally had enough and told Diane straight out that he was choosing to have a relationship with his son and his future grandchild. He told her she was welcome to join them anytime, but he wasn't going to miss out on being a grandfather just because she wanted to play house with Lindsay. Diane had screamed at him that he was picking sides, and he'd said yes, he was picking his actual family. We sat at the kitchen table, and Wayne looked like he'd aged 10 years in one conversation. Colton reached over and squeezed his dad's shoulder and told him he was proud of him for finally speaking up. The screenshots started showing up in my phone on Saturday afternoon. First one from Haley, then one from Colton's sister, then one from his brother. Lindsay had posted a whole photo album on social media from another wine tasting with Diane. The captions were all about found family and chosen mothers and the special bond between women who truly understand each other. There were pictures of them holding wine glasses and laughing. Pictures of them with their arms around each other. One picture had a caption about how blood doesn't make you family, love does. Haley's text asked if I'd seen this garbage. Colton's sister wanted to know if his mom had lost her mind. His brother sent 3 question marks and nothing else. I looked at the photos and felt nothing except tired. I was too pregnant and too sick and too focused on actual important things to care about Diane's social media drama. I didn't respond to any of the screenshots people sent me. I put my phone on silent and spent the afternoon organizing baby clothes that people had given us. Colton came in and found me folding tiny onesies and asked if I'd seen what his mom posted. I told him yes and that I didn't care anymore. He looked relieved that I wasn't upset, and then he grabbed his phone and started blocking Lindsay on every platform he could think of. He blocked her on everything, and then he called his mother. I could hear him from the nursery telling Diane that she needed to stop discussing his marriage with his ex-girlfriend. His voice was calm but firm, and he wasn't asking. He was telling her. He said if she wanted to have any relationship with him or his child, then Lindsay's name needed to stop coming out of her mouth when she talked about his family. Diane must have said something back because Colton's jaw got tight and he repeated himself slower. Then he hung up. Colton came into the nursery and sat down on the floor next to me. He looked exhausted and hurt in a way that made my chest ache. He told me his mother had refused everything he'd asked for. She'd said Lindsay understood her better than her own children did, and that she wasn't going to apologize for having a friend who actually cared about her feelings. Colton's eyes were wet when he repeated what she'd said, and I could tell something inside him had broken. I put down the baby clothes and wrapped my arms around him, and we just sat there on the nursery floor. He cried quietly against my shoulder, and I held him while he processed that his mother valued his ex-girlfriend more than she valued him. We stayed there until it got dark outside, and neither of us said anything because there wasn't anything left to say. Haley called me 3 weeks later with an idea for a baby shower. She wanted to host it at her house and invite all the women in the family. She listed off names of aunts and cousins and Colton's sister, and then she paused and asked if I wanted her to invite Diane. I sat there holding the phone and thinking about whether I even wanted Diane at my baby shower. Part of me hoped she'd come and act normal and show that she cared about her grandchild. Part of me knew she'd probably bring Lindsay or make the whole day about her feelings. I told Haley to invite her because it felt wrong not to, even though I was already preparing myself for disappointment. Haley said she'd send the invitation, and we'd see what happened. I spent the next 2 weeks trying not to think about whether Diane would show up, or whether she'd bring Lindsay as her +1. Colton kept telling me not to stress about it, but I couldn't help imagining different scenarios of how the day might go wrong. The baby shower happened on a Sunday afternoon at Haley's house, and I got there early to help set up decorations. Women started arriving around 1 o'clock, and the house filled up with Colton's aunts and cousins and family friends. Colton's sister brought a huge gift bag and hugged me tight. Wayne's sister came and brought homemade cookies. Isabella arrived with Haley and immediately started asking where the mom-to-be was sitting. By 2 o'clock, the living room was packed with women laughing and eating cake and playing baby shower games. Diane wasn't there. I kept watching the door thinking maybe she was just running late, but 3 o'clock came and went, and her chair stayed empty. Haley checked her phone and showed me that Diane had read the invitation 2 weeks ago, but never responded. At 4 o'clock, someone asked out loud where Diane was, and the whole room got quiet. Haley said she'd invited her, but Diane must have been too busy. Colton's sister made a disgusted sound and said their mother was probably out with Lindsay. The other women started talking openly about how strange it was that Diane kept missing family events. Someone mentioned Christmas, and someone else brought up Isabella's birthday. I sat there opening gifts while the women in Colton's family criticized his mother's absence and defended me without me having to say a single word. A generic gift card showed up in our mailbox 3 days later with no note, just Diane's name on the return address. The week after the baby shower, Colton's sister showed up at our house unannounced. She asked if we could talk privately, and I led her to the back porch while Colton stayed inside. She sat down and wouldn't look at me for a full minute before she started apologizing. She said she hadn't seen how bad things were with their mother until Christmas happened, and the whole family started talking. She admitted Diane had always been controlling about family stuff, but this situation with Lindsay showed something darker that she'd been ignoring. She told me about times growing up when Diane would pit the kids against each other or punish them by withdrawing affection for weeks. She said she thought their mom had gotten better with age, but watching her choose Lindsay over her own grandchild made her realize the problem never went away. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened while she cried and apologized for not standing up for me sooner. She hugged me before she left and said I was good for Colton and good for the family even if Diane couldn't see it. 2 days later, I got an email from Diane that was 3 pages long. She explained that she wouldn't be coming to family events anymore because the family had clearly chosen me over her. She wrote that I'd manipulated everyone with my fake kindness and destroyed her relationship with her children. She said I'd turned her own mother against her and poisoned her husband's mind. She claimed Lindsay was the only person who truly understood family loyalty, and everyone else had abandoned her. The email went on about how she'd given her whole life to her family, and this was how they repaid her. She said she hoped I was happy now that I'd won and taken everything from her. I read it twice and then forwarded it to Colton without responding. Colton spent an hour writing his response and showed it to me before he sent it. He'd made a detailed list of every family event Diane had missed because of Lindsay over the past year. He included the dates and what Lindsay's excuse was each time. He listed every hurtful thing Diane had said about our marriage starting from when we got engaged. He wrote about the Thanksgiving introduction and the Christmas photo incident and her reaction to my pregnancy. He ended by saying the door was open when she was ready to prioritize actual family over her obsession with his ex-girlfriend. He said he loved her, but he wouldn't let her hurt his wife and child anymore. I watched him hit send and saw his hands shaking. Wayne came over 3 days later and asked to speak with us privately. We sat in the living room and he looked older than I'd ever seen him. He told us he'd been sleeping in the guest room for 2 months because he couldn't stand watching Diane choose Lindsay over their grandchild. He said he'd tried talking to her about it, but she accused him of betraying her too. He was considering a separation if things didn't change soon because he couldn't live with someone who cared more about her son's ex than her own family. He cried when he said it, and Colton hugged him for a long time. Wayne asked if he could come over for dinner once a week and help set up the nursery. He said he didn't want to miss his grandchild's life because his wife had lost her mind. I was 6 months pregnant when my phone rang at 2 in the morning. It was Isabella calling from her bedroom saying she couldn't breathe right and her chest hurt. I asked if she'd called Diane, but she said Diane's phone went straight to voicemail. I told her I was coming to get her and woke up Colton. He wanted to drive, but I was already dressed and moving. I got to Isabella's house in 15 minutes and found her sitting on her bed in her nightgown looking scared. I helped her get dressed and walked her to the car. She kept apologizing for bothering me, and I kept telling her to save her breath. The emergency room was nearly empty at that hour. I got Isabella checked in and stayed with her while they ran tests and asked questions. The doctors were worried about her heart and wanted to admit her overnight for observation. I sat in her room while they hooked her up to monitors and brought her medication. She held my hand and told me I was a good girl. Wayne arrived after his shift ended at 6 in the morning. He came straight from work, still wearing his uniform, and hugged me with tears running down his face. He thanked me for being there for his mother-in-law when his wife couldn't be bothered to answer her phone. I left them alone and went home to sleep for a few hours. Haley called Diane 6 times that morning to tell her their mother was in the hospital. Diane didn't answer any of the calls. Haley left voicemails and sent text messages explaining that Isabella had a medical emergency. Diane finally responded 12 hours later saying she was at a spa weekend with Lindsay and her phone had been off. She asked what happened like it wasn't urgent anymore. Haley told me about the conversation, and I could hear the anger in her voice. She said their mother had chosen a spa day over knowing whether her own mother was dying. Isabella stayed in the hospital for 2 days while they ran more tests. Her heart was fine, but she had a bad infection that needed treatment. She recovered quickly with antibiotics, but Haley told me privately that Isabella was hurt. Diane couldn't be bothered to check her phone for an entire weekend. The family group chat exploded with people asking why Diane hadn't come to the hospital. Colton's brother posted that their mother had been at a spa with Lindsay instead of checking on her own mother. The family dynamics shifted right there in that chat. Even people who'd defended Diane before started questioning her priorities. Diane showed up at our house 4 days later without calling first. I answered the door 7 months pregnant, and she pushed past me demanding to know why nobody told her about Isabella's emergency. Colton came down the stairs holding his phone and showed her the call logs. Haley had called 6 times. Wayne had called 4 times. Colton had called twice. All the calls went to voicemail or weren't answered. Diane's face went red and she started yelling that we should have tried harder to reach her. Colton pulled up her text messages showing she'd read Haley's messages about the hospital within an hour, but didn't respond for 12 hours. I stood in our doorway with my hand on my pregnant belly, watching my mother-in-law try to blame everyone else for her own choices. She kept saying we didn't understand how important her friendship with Lindsay was and how much stress she'd been under. Colton's voice stayed calm when he told her she needed to leave. He said she couldn't come back until she was ready to apologize and change her behavior. Diane looked at me like I'd orchestrated the whole thing. She called me a manipulative witch and said I'd destroyed her family. Colton stepped between us and told his mother to get out of our house. She left crying and I locked the door behind her. I watched Colton close the door after his mother left, and the silence in our house felt heavy. He turned to me with exhaustion written all over his face and pulled me close without saying anything. My pregnant belly pressed against him and I felt him take a shaky breath. The next morning, my phone lit up with notifications from the family group chat. Diane had sent a long message claiming I'd stolen her son and turned the entire family against her. She wrote about how she'd always welcomed me, but I couldn't accept that Lindsay was important to Colton's past. Most people didn't respond at all, but a few relatives started asking questions. Colton's cousin asked why Diane kept missing family events if she cared so much about staying connected. Haley posted that their mother had been at a spa with Lindsay instead of checking on Isabella in the hospital. Wayne's sister pointed out that Diane chose Lindsay's party over Christmas with 30 family members. I didn't add anything to the conversation because I didn't need to. The family was finally seeing what I'd been dealing with for 3 years without me having to say a word. 3 days later, Wayne showed up at our door with his truck full of boxes. He looked tired but determined when he told us he'd gotten an apartment 15 minutes away. Colton helped him unload while I made coffee and tried not to look too interested in their conversation. Wayne explained he wasn't filing for divorce yet, but he needed space from Diane's obsession with Lindsay. He said he couldn't watch his wife choose someone else over their own grandchild anymore. I handed him his coffee and he thanked me for being patient with his family's mess. Wayne started coming over for dinner twice a week after that, always bringing something for the baby's room or helping Colton with house projects. He seemed lighter without Diane's constant drama pulling him down. I went into labor on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks before my due date. The contractions started while I was folding baby clothes in the nursery, and I knew immediately this was real. Colton drove me to the hospital with his hands gripping the steering wheel and his phone connected to his dad on speaker. Wayne said he'd be there in 30 minutes and would call everyone else. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and the lights were too bright, but I focused on breathing through each contraction. Wayne arrived first, still wearing his work clothes, and kissed my forehead before stepping back to let the nurses work. Haley and Reed showed up an hour later with bags of snacks and worried faces. Colton's brother drove 3 hours from the city, and his sister flew in from 2 states away. The waiting room filled with family members who dropped everything to be there for us. Diane didn't come even though Wayne called her directly from the hospital hallway. I heard him on the phone explaining that I was in labor and the baby was coming early. His voice got sharper when she apparently asked if it was really necessary for her to drive all the way there today. He hung up and came back into the room looking angry and sad at the same time. Hours later, Colton's phone buzzed with a text from his mother saying congratulations, but she didn't want to intrude since the family had made it clear she wasn't welcome. He showed me the message between contractions, and I saw the hurt flash across his face before he put the phone away. The labor was long and hard, but every time I looked up, there was someone who actually cared holding my hand or bringing me ice chips. Our daughter arrived just after midnight, tiny and perfect with a full head of dark hair. The doctor placed her on my chest and I couldn't breathe for a second because she was so beautiful. Colton cut the cord with tears running down his face, and then everyone was crying and laughing at the same time. The nurses cleaned her up and checked all her measurements while I tried to process that I was actually a mother now. Wayne held his granddaughter with his whole body shaking and tears streaming down his face. I watched Colton take photos of his dad meeting the baby and felt grateful that at least one grandparent showed up when it mattered. Haley took a million pictures and Reed kept saying she looked just like Colton did as a baby. The hospital room stayed full of family until the nurses finally kicked everyone out so I could rest. We brought the baby home 3 days later to a house full of gifts and flowers from family members. I was exhausted and sore but happy to be in my own bed. Colton barely slept those first few nights, always jumping up to check on the baby or bring her to me for feeding. Wayne came by every morning before work just to hold his granddaughter for 20 minutes. On the 3rd day home, I was sitting in the nursery feeding the baby when the doorbell rang. Colton went to answer it, and I heard Diane's voice in the hallway asking if she could come in. My whole body tensed up, but I stayed where I was with the baby latched on. Colton came upstairs with an envelope in his hand, and Diane following behind him. She was alone without Lindsay for the first time in forever and carrying bags of baby gifts. She asked if she could meet her granddaughter, and I saw real nervousness in her face. Colton sat down next to me and opened the letter while I kept feeding the baby. The apology letter talked a lot about how hurt Diane felt when the family were excluded her, and how she didn't understand why everyone turned against her. She wrote about missing Christmas and the birth because she felt unwelcome, not because she didn't care. There was barely anything about how her actions hurt us, or why she'd chosen Lindsay over her own family for so long. Colton finished reading and looked at his mother standing in the doorway of our nursery. He told her she could come in for 30 minutes, but this didn't fix everything that happened. Diane moved slowly into the room and sat in the rocking chair across from us. I finished feeding the baby and handed her to Colton so he could burp her. Then he carefully placed his daughter in his mother's arms, and Diane started crying immediately. She looked down at the baby and said she'd missed so much because she was stubborn and foolish. Her voice broke when she talked about not being at the hospital and not meeting her granddaughter right away. I watched carefully as she promised to do better and put family first from now on. The baby made little sounds, and Diane's face softened in a way I hadn't seen in years. After 30 minutes, Colton took the baby back and walked his mother to the door. She hugged him and left without arguing about the time limit. The next 2 months were busy with night feedings and diaper changes and learning how to be parents. Diane started showing up to family events without Lindsay, and nobody mentioned the change out loud. She came to Sunday dinners at Wayne's new apartment and helped Haley plan Isabella's birthday celebration. I watched her apologize to Isabella for missing so much time together and saw her grandmother hug her with forgiveness. She apologized to Haley for choosing Lindsay over their relationship as sisters. One afternoon, she came over while Colton was at work and asked if we could talk. She sat at my kitchen table and apologized for how she treated our marriage from the beginning. She admitted she'd been wrong about everything, and she understood if I couldn't forgive her right away. I didn't say much because I needed to see if her actions matched her words this time. Wayne told us one evening that he'd agreed to try marriage counseling with Diane. They'd been meeting with someone twice a week, and he was slowly spending more time back at their house. He pulled Colton aside privately and explained that Diane had finally ended her friendship with Lindsay after realizing what it cost her. Apparently, Lindsay had gotten angry when Diane said she needed to focus on her real family, and they hadn't spoken in weeks. Wayne said the counselor was helping Diane understand why she'd gotten so attached to Lindsay in the first place. Something about wanting the daughter she never had, and projecting that onto someone who didn't actually want to be part of the family. I listened from the other room while holding the baby and felt cautiously hopeful that maybe things could actually get better now. Diane started showing up on Tuesdays and Thursdays to help with the baby. She'd arrive around 10 in the morning with coffee for me, and this careful smile that didn't quite reach her eyes yet. The first few visits were awkward because we both knew what had happened, and neither of us wanted to pretend it didn't matter. She'd hold the baby while I showered or folded laundry, and she actually asked questions about feeding schedules instead of telling me what I should be doing. When the baby cried, Diane would hand her back to me instead of trying to take over like she knew better. I watched her closely during those early weeks, looking for signs that this was temporary or fake. She brought meals she'd cooked herself, remembered that I couldn't eat dairy while nursing, and never once mentioned Lindsay's name. Colton would come home from work and find his mother reading to the baby in the nursery, and I could see him trying to figure out if this change was real too. We didn't talk about the past directly because that felt too raw, but Diane started apologizing through actions instead of words. She'd text before coming over, she'd leave when I said I needed to rest, and she stopped posting about family stuff on social media entirely. One Thursday afternoon while the baby napped, Diane sat at my kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She looked tired in a way that seemed deeper than just lack of sleep. She started talking about how she'd watched me fit into the family so easily, how everyone loved me right away, and how that made her feel like she'd failed with Lindsay. Her voice got quiet when she admitted she'd been jealous of how naturally I belonged when Lindsay had always struggled to commit to anything. She said she'd projected all her disappointment about Lindsay onto our marriage because it was easier than admitting she'd invested years in the wrong relationship. The words came out slowly like she'd been practicing them in therapy, and I could tell this confession cost her something. She looked at me with red eyes and said she was genuinely sorry for making me feel unwelcome in my own family. I didn't know what to say because part of me was still angry and hurt, but another part recognized that this moment mattered. I told her I appreciated the apology, and I needed to see consistent change before I could fully trust her again. She nodded and said she understood, that she'd earned my doubt, and she planned to prove herself through actions. The baby's christening planning started a month later, when Colton and I decided on a date at our church. I was nervous about including Diane in the planning because this felt like a test of whether her changes were real or temporary. She called me one evening and asked if she could help organize the celebration, and I could hear the hope in her voice mixed with fear that I'd say no. I agreed, but set clear boundaries right away about guest lists and planning decisions. I told her that Haley and I were making the final calls on everything, and she could contribute ideas but not take over. Diane agreed immediately without arguing or trying to negotiate for more control. We had a planning meeting at Haley's house where I laid out exactly what I wanted for the christening, and Diane took notes and asked questions instead of pushing her own vision. When I said no to her suggestion about the flowers, she just said okay, and moved on to the next topic. Haley kept giving me these surprised looks because we both expected more resistance. The next few weeks of planning showed me that Diane meant what she'd said about respecting boundaries. She worked alongside Haley to book the venue and coordinate the catering, and she never once tried to go around me to make decisions. When relatives called her asking about the christening details, she directed them back to me instead of taking over those conversations. She helped address invitations at my kitchen table while I fed the baby, and she didn't complain when I was rejected her first draft of the wording. The guest list discussion could have been a disaster, but Diane accepted every name I included without questioning my choices. Lindsay's name never came up during any planning meeting, and I watched Diane carefully for signs that she was struggling with that exclusion. If it bothered her, she kept it completely hidden. She seemed focused on proving she could be the grandmother and mother-in-law I needed rather than the one she'd been before. Haley told me privately that Diane had called her crying one night, grateful that I was giving her this chance to be involved. The christening happened on a sunny Saturday morning with the whole family gathered at the church. Our daughter wore the christening gown that had been in Colton's family for 3 generations, and Diane had spent hours carefully pressing and preparing it. The ceremony was beautiful and simple, and afterwards we had a reception at a restaurant near the church. Diane had helped set up all the decorations the night before, working late with Haley to make sure everything looked perfect. When it came time for speeches, Diane stood up with a piece of paper in her shaking hands. She talked about family and second chances in a way that felt humble instead of performative. She admitted she'd made serious mistakes in how she'd treated our marriage, and she thanked me specifically for giving her the opportunity to be part of her granddaughter's life. Her voice broke when she said she didn't deserve this second chance, but she was grateful for it every single day. The room was quiet while she spoke, and I could see other family members wiping their eyes. She looked directly at me when she finished and said she hoped to spend the rest of her life proving she could be the mother-in-law and grandmother we deserved. 2 weeks after the christening, Wayne called a family dinner at their house to make an announcement. Diane looked nervous when we all gathered in their dining room, and Wayne held her hand while he explained that they'd been going to marriage counseling twice a week for 3 months. He said the counseling had helped them reconnect and remember why they'd fallen in love 30 years ago. Then he announced they were planning to renew their vows on their 30th anniversary in 6 months. Diane added that she wanted the whole family there to witness them recommitting to each other and to being better family members. The family erupted in congratulations and hugs, and I watched Isabella cry happy tears while holding her daughter. Colton squeezed my hand under the table, and I knew he was thinking the same thing I was about how far his parents had come. Haley immediately started planning the vow renewal ceremony, and everyone talked about how this felt like a new beginning for the whole family. Sitting in bed that night after the dinner, I realized something important about everything that had happened. Standing up for myself and setting hard boundaries had actually saved this family instead of destroying it like Diane had claimed. She'd needed to face real consequences and lose access to her family before she could see how badly she'd damaged her relationships. If I'd just kept accepting her behavior and trying to be nice, nothing would have changed. Diane would still be prioritizing Lindsay over her actual family, and the resentment would have kept building until something worse happened. The exclusion and isolation she'd experienced had forced her to examine her choices and get help. Wayne moving out had been the wake-up call she'd needed to understand she was destroying her marriage too. All the pain and conflict had led to this moment where healing was actually possible because everyone finally understood where the boundaries were. Colton found me in the nursery a few days later, watching our daughter sleep in her crib. He put his arms around me from behind and said he was proud of how I'd handled everything, even though it had been messy and painful. He told me our marriage was stronger because we'd faced this challenge together, and he'd never once doubted which side he was on. I leaned back against him and felt the truth of that statement. We'd been tested in ways most couples never face with family, and we'd come through it with our relationship intact. He'd chosen me over his mother repeatedly, and that had built a foundation of trust that would carry us through whatever came next. He said he used to worry about balancing his family and his marriage, but now he understood they weren't supposed to be in competition. His mother had created that false choice, and by refusing to accept it, we'd forced everyone to find a healthier dynamic. 6 months after our daughter's birth, family gatherings felt genuinely warm instead of tense and performative. Diane showed up to Sunday dinners at Wayne's house and helped cook instead of trying to run everything. She played with the baby on the floor and asked about my day like she actually cared about the answer. She'd rebuilt her relationship with Haley through consistent effort and regular phone calls. Wayne looked happier than I'd seen him in years, spending time with his granddaughter and planning the vow renewal with actual excitement. Colton's siblings had started including us in more family activities because the drama had finally settled. Lindsay's name hadn't come up in months, and nobody seemed to know or care what she was doing anymore. The family photos Diane posted now actually included me and our daughter, with captions about being blessed and grateful. I'd stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop because Diane's changes had remained consistent through holidays and stressful moments. Isabella's health had improved significantly with regular family support and weekly visits from multiple relatives. She told me one Sunday afternoon that I was her favorite granddaughter-in-law, which made everyone at the table laugh. Diane smiled when she said it instead of looking hurt or jealous. The family joked that I'd earned that title through hospital visits and birthday parties, and Isabella agreed while patting my hand. She pulled me aside later and said she was proud of me for standing up for myself when her daughter was being unreasonable. She admitted she'd been worried about Diane's obsession with Lindsay, but hadn't known how to address it without making things worse. Now she felt like she had her daughter back, and she thanked me for forcing the confrontation that led to real change. Thanksgiving arrived 10 months after our daughter's birth, and the whole family gathered at Wayne's house because he'd offered to host instead of Diane doing it like usual. The kitchen smelled like turkey and stuffing while everyone crowded around talking and laughing with plates balanced on their laps. I was helping clear dishes when Diane appeared next to me at the sink and touched my arm gently. She asked if we could talk privately for a minute and led me into Wayne's study where family photos lined the walls. Diane's hands twisted together as she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said she needed to thank me for something important. She said I could have given up on this family when she made it nearly impossible to be part of it, but instead I fought for my place here and forced everyone to see what really mattered. Her voice cracked when she admitted she was wrong about everything. Wrong about Lindsay. Wrong about our marriage. Wrong about what family actually meant. She said she was grateful I didn't let her destroy what Colton and I had built together, because watching us now showed her what a real partnership looked like. 3 weeks later, I took a pregnancy test in our bathroom and stared at the positive result with my heart racing. Colton was the first person I told, and he picked me up and spun me around while grinning like crazy. Then I called Diane before telling anyone else in the family, and her reaction made me cry. She started sobbing happy tears over the phone and immediately started talking about planning a celebration dinner with everyone. She asked if she could help with anything I needed and promised to be there for every doctor appointment if I wanted her there. The difference between this pregnancy and my first one hit me hard because last time she'd questioned whether we should even have kids. Wayne pulled Colton aside one evening when they were working on the nursery together for our second baby. I was downstairs, but Colton told me later that his dad said something that stuck with him. Wayne admitted that my actions over the past year had actually saved his marriage by forcing Diane to see what really mattered before it was too late. He said the family was closer now than it had been in years because everyone finally understood where the boundaries were and what showing up actually meant. Wayne thanked Colton for marrying someone strong enough to stand up for herself and smart enough to know how to fix what was broken. Our family found a balance over the following months that felt different from before in important ways. I was respected as Colton's wife and our children's mother without having to prove myself constantly. Diane rebuilt her relationships through consistent effort and regular presence instead of trying to control everything. Everyone understood now that showing up mattered more than history or past relationships. Sunday dinners happened at different houses with genuine warmth instead of tension. Diane brought toys for our daughter and asked about my pregnancy symptoms like she actually cared. Wayne looked relaxed and happy when he talked about becoming a grandfather again. The family photos Diane posted online now included all of us with captions that felt real instead of performative. It wasn't perfect because families never are, but it was real and honest. That was better than the fake harmony we had before when everyone pretended not to notice the problems. We'd all learned that sometimes you have to break things completely before you can build them back stronger.